Well, hello there, and welcome to the Deadly Analysis podcast. We have been on something of a hiatus for the last couple months. It's been very quiet on this channel. One could say it's been a very quiet place around here. Yeah, which is kind of perfect because that's the name of the film we're going to be discussing today. What are the odds? How crazy would it be if I actually planned to take 2 months off just so I can make that joke? Like, I've done crazier things. I really have. So I'm just going to let you ponder that. So A Quiet Place. My short review, I'll give it right off the bat. Jim Halpert meets Shut the Fuck Up. That's the whole film. Thanks for watching the Deadly Analysis podcast. Tune in next week. No, I'm just kidding. So this movie, I totally dug this movie. I love, this was a good horror movie to me. It's nowhere near a perfect horror film. I mean, it didn't scare me very much, but I think, you know, as we've discussed a billion times over, horror films are more than just being about like raw fright. There's more than just an element of like being scared in a good horror film. Like to me, a good horror film is multi-layered. There's a kind of deep resonance. And I think this film actually has something like that. At least it did for me. So I'm excited to explore what exactly that was for me with you guys. Because I think why this film, like to the degree that it scared me, I think the reason is probably going to be a little different for me than it is for you guys, but I could be wrong. So I'm curious to kind of talk about why. You know, without going too far into it, for me, what made this film really scary was the anxiety, there's just the palpable anxiety in this film of keeping your family together and alive in a world that's doing everything it can to kill them. And that scared me so much in this film, like more than the monsters. I mean, the monsters wouldn't have mattered without that. It just was so, like, I felt so much anxiety in this movie for that reason. Anyway, so we can get into that. But what did you guys think? Jim, what did you think of A Quiet Place?
I tried to. You almost spoke too fast for me to sign everything that you were saying, Noah. So
I did that on purpose. I totally did that on purpose.
It was an attempt, and then I was like, oh wow, he's using words I don't know. So that was tough. I had to finger spell more than I had hoped. Anyway, I liked it. I liked it fine. I thought it was almost a perfectly made genre film. One of the things that I'm interested in hearing from you, Noah, is what the deeper levels and what the deeper resonance you had of the deeper experience you had of this, because I went in hoping that this would be 2018's Get Out, which was a great horror film with larger socially relevant themes going on. And what I got in A Quiet Place instead was a great horror film. I'm not complaining, but it did fall short of something that was socially relevant, that was reaching for some really high and interesting ideas. So I'm actually curious to hear what you have to say about that. The other thing that there are two things that I want to highlight about the why I think it's a technically amazing film is first the sound design. It's amazing that a film called A Quiet Place has some of the best sound design, and what I hope actually will win the best sound design, sound and best sound mixing Oscar this year. I'm calling it in April, which is sort of like calling the World Series during spring training. But the sound design in this film is amazing, especially how they shut the sound off whenever they're in the perspective of the deaf daughter. I thought that was a genius move on the part of John Krasinski. The other thing is I'm interested, sometimes this worked for me, sometimes it didn't. I think this film is a study in revealing information to the audience in order to heighten suspense. Like the control of information, plot information that this film has is really interesting, and that's something that we'll probably dive a little bit deeper into that as things go on. But those are sort of my opening thoughts. Yeah, I'm curious to hear what everybody else says.
Yeah, it's certainly being treated like Get Out. You know, I agree with you that I don't think it had the same social resonance. I mean, there's probably social elements to this about maybe on the issue of disability. And I read some articles on the Huffington Post, which is it's like I consider myself a liberal, and some of the articles were just so way left I couldn't like my head was spinning about just is it a good thing or a bad thing, you know, like treating it as something that is powerful in this movie versus acknowledging that it's actually a disability. So I read some articles on that, but it didn't have the same social power, I think, as like, you know, the obvious racial stuff in Get Out. And there were some differences, but for me, it really, and I think I'm going to be the only one that felt this weird thing with this movie. It just made me all the more not want to have children. I know that sounds insane, and this is one of the things. What I've noticed is that I bring my shit to horror films. And how many times we've talked about the horror films that I've chosen, and it's really me talking about things I'm going through that I'm seeing in films. It's so weird to see that, but this had that for me. Like, the monsters are scary, right? But look, I've seen The Mist, right? There was a little bit of Mist in this. There was a little bit of Signs in this, like an enhanced version of, like a much better version of Signs in this film. It felt like that, but the monsters didn't really get to me. It was just watching John Krasinski try to keep his family intact, like knowing that in one fell swoop, well, literally, spoilers. I mean, we always talk about spoilers when we do these, but like in one fell swoop, he lost his son just fast because of making a noise. And one of the conversations I've had with my wife when we decided we weren't going to have kids, or if we were, and you know, we ended up ultimately deciding not to. One of the main reasons was just the anxiety of knowing that I'm bringing a conscious creature into the world that has the capacity to suffer. Is that bothers me. And I don't mean that in any normative way. I've gotten into trouble having this conversation with some of my wife's friends in the past. I don't mean that normatively, like, how dare you have kids? I'm not saying that. But for me personally, I'm scared shitless of creating this being that could potentially have there's so much in this world that wants to kill kids, people, humans, adults. Like, everything in this world is out to kill you to some degree. There's a lot of suffering in this world. And this movie was like a reminder that you've worked so hard to create this very beautiful, loving, innocent being. And in his case, 3 of them, right? I think there was 3 kids. And you know, the world is such a place that John Krasinski and Emily Blunt are doing everything they can to hold on to what they have. And as the rope just keeps getting tighter around their family's neck. And that scared me. I mean, there were so many scenes, just a simple nail on a board caused this domino effect, right on the stairs, caused this domino effect that literally almost leads to the entire family being decimated. And just watching that left me feeling like, I don't want that responsibility. Maybe that sounds horrible. Like, I can't, I don't want to do that to someone else. Like, be in a world where someone could just, you know, I could be walking down the street with my kid and they could trip, hit their head and just be in a coma, like freak accidents. You know what I mean? And so I felt that in this movie. I'm probably the only one, maybe, but it just made that anxiety was just there for me the whole time. Bugged me to death. And then you could hear people eating popcorn and you could hear people coughing and it took that anxiety and like threw it all over me. You know what I mean? I was just like sitting there. I was like this. So it's one of those times where I was like, oh God, please don't die. When that kid died, I'm like, that's it. I called my wife. We're definitely not having kids. Anyway. So yeah.
I actually sense that too. No, I mean, I didn't quite sense it so much in a personal way in the way you did, but I definitely felt that one of the overlying themes of the film, of course, is the struggles and the difficulty of keeping your family together, right? All the threats to the family, you know, obviously, you know, one of the horror works often by metaphor and indirection. And, you know, in the world where it hasn't been taken over by alien creatures or whatever, there are other threats, and that people do have to sort of struggle and fight and go to extreme lengths to make sure that everyone is safe and okay. That's certainly, this isn't the first movie that has explored that theme, but I think it did explore it pretty well. I too sensed sort of the social relevance, again, not as heavy as Get Out, but definitely the questions about the social construction of disability, and of course simply the importance of having a deaf actor play a main role, which is something that you don't really see very much in film. And so it was really, I thought, a fantastic performance by Millicent Simmons as the daughter, and I hope I see more of her. I'm curious to see what she does next, because it would really be tragic if this was like her only real turn in mainstream cinema. I hope that she has a good agent and that they find her someplace else to go from here.
Before we go on, is she the one who's in the Hereditary, right? The new trailer for the new horror film. I think that's her in it. I saw the trailer a couple times and it looked familiar. I probably should have Googled this before we started our hangout.
I'm looking up her IMDb right now.
Yeah, but she looks like one of the main characters in Hereditary. Maybe it's not, but
No, she was in a film called Wonderstruck last year,
Okay.
and other than that, that's her only other credit besides.
Wow. What'd you think, Ben? Did you like the movie?
Honestly, I'm having some trouble deciding how I feel about the movie. Echoing everything that you've said so far, they did some really important things here, and I think it's very cool that they went the direction that they did. They had a deaf actress come in and made that a huge part of the plot. That's all very interesting. The sound design is very interesting. I love that when they even took the perspective of the monster and you could hear all of those amplified noises about the egg timer, all of these different things. It's very, very cool. But I'm a little bit disappointed that they used such a safe plot. I'm not such a stickler on the plot. Like, it's not hugely important. A lot of the things they built around the plot were very cool in this movie. But I mean, it's that same old, post-apocalyptic world where we have one story of a family trying to survive and doing the best they can, and at the end, they find a solution, right? I think we're okay with spoilers on this podcast, correct? So, I don't know, man. Like the plot just really the the overusedness of that particular storyline, I think, just really just stood out way too much for me. And especially leading up to the end where you have, this very cool resolution, right? How they integrate the cochlear implant into the weapon that, becomes the weakness for the monsters. That's awesome. That's great. But, where you end up having this almost like Sam Raimi style cheesiness where she cocks the shotgun, I don't know, man. Like there was just too much in the foundation of this film that really bothered me to make it one of the greats. I think it was good, but there's tired plot, cheesy ending.
So let me ask you this one then, Ben. If early on in production, John Krasinski had taken the concept to you, what advice would you have given him to avoid that problem? How would you have changed sort of the basic layout of the film?
Well, that's the thing. It would be a little bit difficult to offer that advice because anything that I would say this would be a really cool story to build all of this awesome stuff around, it would probably be something that's already been done before. I don't necessarily consider myself a creative writer of any note, but what I definitely would have probably pushed for is something a little bit less safe. My instinct here is that they went with a safe plot so that they could push the boundaries in other ways and kind of like, maybe make it a little bit more palatable, and kind of integrate it more with audiences into what they find familiar. But I really would have encouraged them to push for a more original, unique plot.
By safe, do you mean that that it was kind of an isolation piece in that sense, that it all took place in one setting, like on their farm? Is that what you mean? Like, what can you cash out? What exactly what was that?
There are movies that do that kind of thing. Like I think one of them called Buried or something like that, where the entire thing takes place within the space of a coffin. And it's this guy trying to get out. That's a really interesting film, but there's not a lot of complexity to it. It's very good, but it's in one small space pretty much the entire time. I don't think that's the issue. I really think it comes down to the fact that you just have this narrative that's been used so many times. You have the post-apocalyptic world. Okay. You've got some scary monsters out there that are sort of ill-defined. Okay. You're centering around a family and they're like their makeshift sort of survival thing. I mean, like, how different is this from The Walking Dead, to be honest?
It did also reminded me of, I guess it was last year, It Comes at Night. There was some thematic similarities between the two films, but I think that A Quiet Place was the better of those two films.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I would say that's what they did, sort of wrap the plot in, definitely made it much better. As I said, I think it's very good. I think it deserves its score on Rotten Tomatoes. As far as critics are concerned, I think it deserves a high score. But there's just that foundation. I don't know. They should have they should have pushed it a little more. They should have went a little further with something a little more original.
So let me ask you this. I mean, one of the things that occurred to me was they could have pushed the basic premise even more to a greater extreme, I felt. And this isn't to do with the plot. Again, I recognize, Ben, you're talking about the plot. But what would you guys have felt if they literally made it like a almost completely silent movie, like if there had been no spoken words, if every single dialogue interaction was done through sign language, if there was no score at all, there was only the ambient sounds. I mean, I don't know if that would have been better, but as I was watching it, I found myself wondering how would this film play out if they really pushed it that far.
I think that so when Noah was talking about the idea of this being about the anxiety surrounding having children and then keeping those children safe and properly caring for them, one of the things that occurred to me was the subplot about whether the father and whether the daughter believes that the father loves her. I think there's no question in our mind as viewers that the father, of course, loves his children. I mean, we see that action. I actually don't think that they gave the daughter enough evidence to suggest that the father doesn't love her. But that theme then would probably have been downplayed, because I think that moment by the waterfall where the father and the son can talk, and there's actually sort of a break in the anxiety. You can almost breathe. I think when they finally spoke was the one moment where Krasinski, as the director, sort of let you breathe a little bit, so let up on the gas a little bit. And I think the film needed that, because otherwise we're just going to be bundles of nerves throughout the entire film. And I think that, just letting us go, oh, okay, we're all right now. And that's exactly how the characters felt. So as an audience member, I felt the way the characters felt when they were by the waterfall. And so I don't know if that would have fully improved the film. I think in order to satisfy the things that Ben is talking about, you do have to do a radical reconstruction of the plot. And like Ben, I don't know how to do that. I think that one of the things you're saying, Ben, is very similar to what I said at the outset, was that I think that this is a good genre film. And it's not reaching for the type of, it's not reaching for anything higher by doing something wholly original in terms of its storyline. It's doing something wholly original, well, not wholly original, relatively original in terms of its filmmaking and its technical prowess. That's where it's breaking ground. It's not breaking ground in terms of plot. That, for me, is fun. Like, that's why I'm giving the film 3.5 stars, not a full 5 or 4.5 or 4+. So that's my response to both, actually, all three of you. Yeah, I don't know. What do the rest of you think about the idea of this being a totally silent film?
I think that definitely would have taken away one of the things I enjoyed, which was that waterfall scene where there's a kind of catharsis, like there's a release when they talk. And I don't know about you guys, but I was tense as shit watching this. I needed that. I needed that moment to kind of, I would have left the theater being it would have been a little too much for me. And not to say that I don't have anything against silent films. We've done a couple of silent films, but I think what Garrett is describing may be a little different. But I needed that part of it to make the film feel whole. The film make me feel whole when I was watching it. I needed that. So.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not saying necessarily I think it would have been a better film, but again, like I said, I was curious because, Ben's comment about it being not daring enough in some ways, I think that would have been more daring. I mean, I think the full, maybe final 45 minutes of the film is basically just nonstop tension. I thought it was phenomenally paced, strangely structured in some ways. I mean, if we want to talk about the structure in more detail later, maybe we can, but that last 45 minutes was just, nonstop tension. And if the whole film had been that, if there hadn't been any let up, I mean, maybe it would have been too much, but maybe it would have been pretty fantastic. It's the kind of thing I would have loved to have been in the editing room for and seen a cut that played with that more extreme version of the concept.
You know what I would have loved to have said when I was in the editing room? Why, oh why, if we are going to spend all of this time making this apparatus of silence around this farm, from the sand to, just the millions of things that they did, why the hell do they still have hanging picture frames in their house? That Garrett, I thought of you when I saw that, Garrett. I was like, Garrett is going to notice that the moment he sees that, because that bothered me.
Believe it or not, I didn't. But now that you mention it, yeah, that's a serious problem. But what did occur to me and did kind of frustrate me, and again, in the nitpicking variety, is why they didn't have more decoys. I mean, they had the fireworks, which obviously was an effective decoy, but it seems like, I would have been carrying that little rocket ship around with me, and then if something happens, you turn it on and you throw it away, and then the monster goes after the decoy. Like they should have been surrounded with decoys. I think that would have been one of the first tactics that I employed.
Yeah, and even bells somewhere else, and I mean, even turning the entire house into. Yeah, well, not the entire, but turning a place into just a wall of sound, like playing, music in some other location far away from them. Yeah, I think that's. But then, of course, you run into the problem of like once you turn the music on, like you have to run pretty fast to get the fuck out of there. But yeah, there's. I see your point that more decoys. Once again, though, I wonder if we're treating the film and treating the universe of the film with more. Are we reading too much into? Are we playing in John Krasinski's sandbox a little bit too much, or is this is this sort of the type of nitpicky film criticism that we should be engaged in as critical thinkers? Half of me is like I didn't, as I was watching the movie. I wasn't thinking like, well, why don't they do this? This is clearly the most logical solution into this in this situation. Why aren't they doing this? As I did during Cough Infinity War. But there are some issues. I don't see as many issues in this film as I do in others. So.
You're totally right. I mean, the sins in this film are totally forgivable. They're not large things. That just caught me. The picture frames caught me, and I don't look for these things, but I caught that. I was like, oh, guys, come on, really, stop. But yeah, for the most part, I think I can forgive. I think I can forgive it from all the others because of all the other stuff it gave me.
Yeah, I can't. I can always nitpick little things, but I know the film succeeds when the little nitpicky things don't distract from my overall enjoyment of the film. But I did want to come back to something about the sort of the more social aspects of the film, because we've touched on a couple of them already. One of the things that I caught in myself, which I wrestled with for maybe a good 10 minutes in the middle of the film, was when they first pan away. So we have the introductory idea, which takes place like 3 months after the outbreak or the landing or whatever it was, and then we jump ahead to a year, and then we cut forward and we see that Emily Blunt is pregnant. And when we first see she's pregnant, I had this thought in my head, like, oh my God, how could they be so irresponsible? I suddenly became this social conservative. Like, oh my God, they should not have done that. They should have been taking more care. And, I caught myself after a few seconds. And it's like, yeah, that is what it's like inside the head of a social conservative who's looks at like single mothers getting pregnant and stuff like that, or anything along those lines. And it's the exact same narrative. And I wasn't sure how to sort of square that with my sort of generally much more liberal, pro-choice sort of attitudes towards women controlling their bodies and so forth. So yeah, I sort of wrestled with that in my own head a little bit. I'm not sure if that any of that hit with you guys.
I just wondered how they had sex. Like, that's sometimes loud.
Jim, you've clearly never had a roommate, because
if you had a roommate, yeah. Beat me to it.
No, I no. Okay, too much information now. I just wondered about is there going to be a Quiet Place porn prequel where they have to be quiet, like they can't even?
They fucked at the waterfall, Jim.
They fucked at the waterfall. Okay, all right. Thank you. That explains it. All right, I'm done. Plot hole. Yeah, I've done most of CinemaSins writing for them now.
Garrett, you're not alone. It did bother me. I actually didn't feel bad about it either. In my head, I was thinking more along the lines. My whole MO for this, I could not get out of my head thinking like the anxiety of the family. So in that context, I was thinking like, oh my God, if you make a single noise, you're going to get your whole family killed. Everybody's going to die. So that's the context in which I saw it. I was like, if you guys did this knowingly, I get this is where we get into like these weird things. If it was an accident, that's one thing. But if they plan to do this, if this was something that they planned, I'm like, y'all really needed to have. You need to be underground, like you need to be at the center of the earth to have this child, because otherwise you could potentially get your whole family killed. So it's more of an irresponsibility in the like it's a very isolated sense of irresponsibility. Do you know what I mean? It's a sort of very unique one-off situation that puts like multiple lives at risk by having this child. So I thought it was irresponsible. That's the position I take. I thought it was irresponsible through and through.
And of course, again, there's a direct metaphor there to many women in a real situation. Women who are single mothers who already have children, bringing another kid into the world literally does put their entire family at risk. It might not be possible for them to feed all their children, or much less send them all to college or something like that. So I think that does track a real phenomena in the world that people do have conflicting attitudes about.
I suddenly changed my mind. I am now going to be normative and be an antinatalist. It's now normative. Now I think it's wrong to have kids. You right there, Garrett. It's over. Ben, you don't agree? You think that Emily Blunt it was not irresponsible for Krasinski and Emily Blunt to have their kid, or what?
Originally, I did agree. At first, my impression of that was like, holy crap, how could they decide to do this? I can't believe this. This is obviously the stupidest decision you could possibly make. But thinking about this from their perspective, I think if you take their perspective a little bit, we have a couple hours to watch this extremely stressful situation, but for them, this has become their new normal. Eventually things, you get sensitized to things, right? Actually bringing it back to the waterfall scene, that's probably a good argument to have something like that in there so that you don't get too sensitized to the stress. But for them, that is their new normal. They live with this every single day, multiple years. They have regular family issues that they deal with within the context of all these monsters and stuff. They're having pithy arguments about, the daughter wants to go on the trip with the dad, and like he's saying no. And yes, he has reasons for that, but she has this very normal sort of like teenagerish kind of response. This kid wants to have his toy, and yes, there are consequences for that, but it's a very normal sort of kid thing to do. When I think about their decision to have a kid, I think it kind of falls into that same sort of line of thinking. A normal couple, a married couple who wants to have kids, that's probably what they're going to do. Yeah, I know. I use that normative language, and that's horrible of me. I apologize. I probably don't want kids either, so I don't know why I'm saying normal. Anyway, it seems not unexpected. And if you take this to an existential place, are they truly living if they're thinking about the short term in such a way that they're only trying to survive? They're not really thinking about the long term. They're not thinking about living and propagating and so on and so forth. It just comes down to an attrition sort of thing at that point if they're not reproducing, right? It's honestly kind of the best possible decision they could make to attempt to, I think, repopulate after all of these people have been slaughtered. Otherwise, eventually, everyone's going to kind of die off.
You sort of get a children of men phenomena type thing happening.
So then we have two conflicting values, it seems. On one hand, we have the responsibility of keeping our entire family alive. On the other hand, we want to still, we want the world to continue on, and we want to be able to live our lives and not be, if I'm getting you wrong, Ben, let me know. We don't just want to acquiesce to the situation that we're under. We also want to build. We don't just want to go backwards. We want to go forwards, right? So you have these two conflicting values. I would land on the side of being careful for however long it took for this to finalize, or if it's 10 years later, I still wouldn't have kids. For me, it would, I don't see that as letting them win so much as I see the weight for me is on caring for the family I do have, for the people that I do have that are alive. That value is so much higher to me and so much more weighted than growing and not living a certain way. It's almost just an ideal in a sense. That's the value. It's like this ideal. We should be, we should continue to live on, and we should, and that's not anything that's tangible in the way of watching your kid get ripped to shreds. Like that's tangible to me. So that's where I would weight it, I guess.
So now, Noah, you mentioned antinatalism, but actually there is something there that is pretty, you mentioned it jokingly, but I think there's a sincere point there. That's, when you consider sort of overpopulation of the planet, people having children arguably are putting the entire human race in danger. So perhaps, again, I don't know if this was an intentioned metaphor on the part of the filmmakers, but I think it's pretty clearly not that deep of a reading. That's, people who are having children, even if they can provide for them themselves, are being irresponsible in the way with regard to the weight that they're putting on the rest of the species.
Go ahead, Jim.
I think there's a couple things. I mean, Noah, even in what you were saying, you were talking about how, I would care for the immediate future until this ends. But that's assuming that there's an end to this. That's assuming that the U.S. military's got a plan, or that's assuming that there's going to be some sort of end to the monsters. Maybe
no, even if it doesn't end. I mean, I'd go so far as to say, even if it doesn't end, then you just don't have kids.
And like, this is your playing Monopoly with cotton balls is your life.
This is your life now. Yeah. I mean, I'd take the hit for my family. I guess what I'm saying. Like, I'd take the hit. I mean, because like, is the risk really worth losing everything you've built prior? Really? Like, is losing I shouldn't say a modicum of the life you've had before. If it is losing a good portion of your day-to-day existence before the monsters attacked and the sort of life that you lived, is that sort of thing more valuable than the 3 children that you've raised? No, not to me.
What if they, I mean, again, this is something that occurred to me, is what if they actually set up camp at the base of the waterfall? What if they had her give birth at the waterfall, they raised the child at the waterfall? I mean, that would obviously be challenging, have other challenges, but I think that, given that they set up how safe the waterfall was, which, by the way, I did think of a waterfall prior to them showing that. I thought that would be a safe place to be, and so I was kind of glad that I called that one in advance. But I was imagining that was what they were going to do. They were going to have her give birth at the waterfall because that would be the only safe place that she could do it. Or I mean, maybe not necessarily the waterfall. What if they had put more work into soundproofing the basement, or they established that the basement was a safer place beforehand? I mean, this is what
it would certainly, yeah. In my mind, it would certainly make it, the weights would start to tip, right? It would start to tip the other way. That's totally true. I'd still wig out a little bit if I was John. You know what I'm like? I'd still be a little. Like, even by the waterfall, just the creatures could be close by accident and just suddenly sense a frequency that's different. And although it's worked, the waterfall's worked every time before, it could be this time that it doesn't, right? There's still that option. The baby's going to cry at some point after you have it. I mean, right? Like, you bring it home. So I think, Garrett, if they had the kid at the waterfall, they still suffer some of the same problems. If they set up base near the waterfall, that would help. Would it change my mind? Maybe. I don't know. But the way they did it now, I do think was demonstrably irresponsible. I'm gonna use stronger language now to start a fight with you guys.
Okay, fight about it. Yeah, let's bring out the claws and the teeth. Honestly, I mean, you're talking about things that they could potentially lose, but I would argue that they've already lost 80% of their everyday lives anyway. They're not going to work. They're not driving around freely. They're not going on vacations. They probably have a 5-mile radius, probably pretty close to that town that they have to sneak into to get medicine. I mean, they
lost their one son.
They lost the son already.
But wouldn't that put an emphasis on like not losing anything else?
No. I mean, that's fear. But there's like that 20% though that they're losing also, just a little more slowly, right? I mean, like, those monsters are eventually going to come in there and get you. People grow old and die. What about their 2 kids? What are they going to do? Eventually they're going to lose their parents and be all by themselves. And, then maybe they live for a little while and then they're going to be gone too. I mean, you've pretty much in that scenario, I think, already lost everything. It's just kind of the time frame you're thinking about that in. The only real way to win is to go back to business as usual and keep doing your thing. Now, as an individual, of course, not everybody wants to have children and stuff like that. But if you're a family and that was your plan to begin with, I totally laud their efforts to not let themselves be defeated entirely by trying to have some semblance of what they would consider to be their ideal scenario.
There is something truly optimistic about that decision, and it's an optimism that is reflected in every single parent's decision to actually have a kid. Because I think every parent is aware of what the sort of concerns that Noah brought up before about the numerous ways in which it could go wrong, and they choose to be a parent anyway. And there definitely is something appealing to that romanticism and that optimism to me. The flip side to this, perhaps, and again, this occurred to me in the film, and actually, it made me wonder if this might have been part of the inspiration for the film. Is there's a true story, a real case, and I hit my ethics students with this every semester, of a family, a Jewish family that was during the Holocaust that was hiding in a basement when the SS was upstairs searching the house, and there was a baby that started to cry, and they tried to calm the baby, and they couldn't, and so the question I asked my students is, do you smother the baby to save everyone else's life? Given that if the Nazis find them down there, they will kill everyone, including the baby. So do you sacrifice the life of the one child to save everyone else's life? And my students always tear their hair out over this one, which is what makes it a great ethical dilemma. It was based on a real case. In the real case, they did actually smother the child, and it's tragic and it's horrific. And I can imagine, you know, I mean, I'm not saying this happened, but I can imagine like John Krasinski or whoever the writers were, right? Whoever came up with the story, Brian Woods and Scott Beck, if they heard this story and thought, hey, we could do a horror movie on that concept.
Yeah, it's certainly. Garrett, I've heard that story. I think I heard that story in one of my philosophy classes along when I was in college, actually. And it did feel like there was hovering around this film. You know what I mean? Just for so you know that I had killed the baby too, like immediately. I probably would have done it the moment I saw it, even if there were no. I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, and I maybe that's why. I mean, I guess the way I'm sort of answering all of these things, it seems to me that I'm placing a really heavy value on the most people, like the current people, the people that are there, like life as it exists now, I guess. And to me, that's something you've built if you're a head of self-preservation. Thank you, Ben. It's something you've built not just for yourself, but for your offspring. And that to me seems to be the thing to put the shield up around the most. So I can't help but take issue with Ben's idea. And I get the optimism in it. I totally get it. But I would sacrifice that. I would think it's the noble thing to do, to be honest with you, to sacrifice that, to put the brunt of the weight on the people that exist now, to lose whatever things that you enjoyed about life could never, to me, be as important as that bond that you have with your children. You know what I mean? I lose all of that shit, lose all of it, break down and suffer, but still have your family. I think that to me is, I don't see that as cynicism. I don't think not having kids is cynicism so much as it is just being logical about the situation you're in. I don't know.
But aren't we ignoring the fact that having a child is adding to that family? That having a child is actually an enhancement of the unit that you're trying to preserve. And I also think that we're not giving enough credit to these characters who were totally prepared to give birth to that child in that house. Like they had the oxygen mask, they had the bathtub, they had I mean that was
they were prepared as they could be with what they had. I can already see Garrett being like, prepared. What are you talking about?
They were definitely not prepared. I mean, I assume for the sake of argument that none of them had medical training. Otherwise, they would have had that. But still, the prospect of her going into early labor is something that should have been keenly on their minds. And Krasinski never should have left the farm that close to her due date. They should have been preparing for her and ready for her to give birth, because early labor happens all the time. I mean, that is by definition a high-risk pregnancy in any understanding of the term. So I mean, again, I think this is a forgivable error, but since you mentioned it, Jim, it's the sort of thing that I disagree. I don't think they were as prepared could be.
Well, I'm talking about the infrastructure in the house, not necessarily Krasinski leaving at the time that he did. Sure. I mean, I guess he shouldn't have left at that time. But I was, when her water broke, I was like, well, how the fuck are they going to deal with this? And sure enough, going back to some of the things I was talking about in my opening, they had shown us how they were going to deal with this along throughout the first and second acts of the film. And I didn't really know how it was all going to get put together until it got put together. I mostly didn't know how it was all going to get put together until it got put together. And so that, in that sense, that's what I meant when I said that they were prepared. But yeah, fair play that he shouldn't have left at the time he did. Yeah.
This is the same family that had the picture frames, guys. I'm just going to keep peppering that in there throughout this conversation. So,
maybe, Noah, maybe that's not their house, right? That's a house that they found. So maybe the idea of taking down the picture frames was more risky than leaving them up. Right?
I wanted to throw back. John Krasinski mentioned that an influence for this film that he had actually was Polanski's Rosemary's Baby, which, you know, when you sort of think about it that way, the same sorts of conversations that we've been having apply to that film, right? Sort of loving the child, but also being afraid about the existence of the child and so forth. So there's a nice parallel there. But Jim, since you brought
along the same lines as he was. Go ahead, Jared.
Yeah, since you brought up the other house, one thing which I didn't understand about the movie, and I'm hoping one of you guys can explain it to me, is why didn't Krasinski want his daughter to go down into the basement? Why was he so concerned about keeping her out of there? We're all stumped on that one. Good.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a reason the story offers, and it was really it was almost like one of those parenting things, like you can't go into dad's room, that sort of shit. But they really didn't offer you would think that in a life or death scenario like this, they'd at least need to know. I don't know.
So she's deaf, right? So and there's a lot of sound equipment down there. She could trigger something without her knowing that she had triggered something, which would then put the family at risk.
That's a reason for her not to go down alone, maybe, but it's not a reason for her not to go down at all. I mean, again, he was obviously very protective of her, and she had never been down there before until at the very end. It was the first time she went down there. You see, she's learning all the things about the aliens that they've compiled and so forth. So
maybe trying to shield her from like the brutality of it all, which seems crazy because she watched her brother. You know, it's like, I don't know.
Exactly. I mean, it clearly was a protective instinct. He was being a father to her. And he also, you know, I can understand why he didn't take her out into the world the way he took his son. It's kind of a little sort of a sexist, chauvinistic thing that the men are going to protect and provide and the women are going to stay home. But it's at least that's a plausible enough psychology that I can get behind it. But the not letting her into the basement, that puzzled me.
Yeah, that was a bit
best
weird.
I can offer is she might have done something and wouldn't have known that she did it. She did it. That's my only answer to that. And even then, I guess you might be right that that makes sense. Both sides make sense. Go ahead, Noah. What are you doing?
I just had like a mind blown moment. So we were just talking about. So I think I can connect two things. Hear me out. Ben and I think to some extent Jim, you know, had mentioned something like growing the family as a kind of optimism, as a good thing and stuff. And I'm sitting here talking about how dangerous it is. And when you think about it, the picture frames are actually a great metaphor for that. They're dangerous. They can fall, they can hang there, but there's a lot of them, right? And they're empty. I don't know if you noticed that when you're watching the film. Go back and watch the film, Garrett. There's a scene where they're going. It has to do whenever they're going up the stairs at one point of the home, and the picture frames are empty. But there's a lot of them. There's a lot. So the insinuation is they took, whoever left the house took all the pictures, right? But there's a lot of frames, and so this idea is like there's room for danger, but it's worth it. That sort of thing. Maybe I'm being way too poetic, but I'm trying to tie together those things. I mean, there is this. So we're talking about all of the same things. We're talking about something that is, to most people, an intensely good, positive thing, having a child, right? But it's also a dangerous thing. It's also something that can fall and break, like a picture frame. It's something that is dangerous but good. So I think that there's some of that in the movie, and maybe that's what I'm trying to explain the damn picture frames. That's what I'm trying to do right now. All right, I'm trying my best. That's all I got.
This is the Deadly Analysis of Picture Frames podcast.
Yeah, this is going to be the thumbnail on YouTube. Will be all of us in a picture frame. That's what it's going to be.
Like the Ordinary People trailer.
So I was gonna ask. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Ben.
It seems like a good metaphor for the not going downstairs thing too, right? You know, I mean, it's almost like too much caution will get you killed. You know, they didn't let her down there. They didn't let the kids down there to see all this information. But as soon as that daughter sees all this stuff, she like puts it together immediately. And suddenly you've got this viable solution for saving the human race.
Toxic masculinity puts the entire human race at danger yet again.
It's the whole point of the movie. The whole point of the film right there.
Well, I don't know if she would have discovered all that she discovered at like if she had gone down there 3 weeks ago, I don't think she would have been able to put two and two together the way she did at the end. Like it was a confluence of events that put all of the puzzle pieces in the right order for her. So as I'm as against toxic masculinity as the next feminist, but it's let's measure our criticisms for a second.
Yeah, no, truly. And again, just in the interest of minor little criticisms, the idea of a sonic weapon is something that occurred to me very early on. I mean, I don't know that they would have had the resources necessarily to put something together, but I'm surprised the military didn't. That seems like something the military could have figured out.
Well, the military, with all their guns and ammo and grenades and all that stuff, they probably were the first ones to go. But
they have sonic weapons, though. They do. You know, I mean, they exist. So
that was honestly one of my biggest gripes as well, was the fact that eventually at the very end of this movie, yes, you have your sonic device that weakens the monster, but the answer is a gun. Are you serious? They shoot this thing and it dies, and then they realize what they can do. Their armor, listen, they have the monsters are supposed to have some kind of armor. Their armor can't be that thick.
And it did like sort of modulate on its own too, right? I mean, the Sonic made it all open wide up so the shotgun could take it out. But
whenever they're hunting you,
times when it went on its own, it was opening up, and a shotgun to the blast to the head could have worked then too.
I couldn't buy it. Yeah, I mean, there definitely had to have been, if a military solution is what they found at the end of the movie, which, by the way, I'm sure the NRA, would absolutely loved the way that turned out. But yeah, I mean, the U.S. military, with whatever weapons that they have, probably could have had something that would have defeated these monsters early on. Yes, there was this early attack. Nobody knew where they came from. They came out of nowhere. But the believability there is quite low.
Yeah, I sort of agree, but again, to me, that's like such a the minor criticisms which I can totally overlook because of the overall quality of the film. So I share the concern. It probably would have been better if the sonic feedback alone had caused the alien's head to explode. But yeah, minor criticism. That's the kind of thing where maybe Krasinski's original script, that's what it was, but some producer came in and said, "I want to see a shotgun blast blow the alien's head off," and he's like, "Fine, okay, give me another $1 million and I'll do it."
Yeah, he's got like an arm the teacher's t-shirt as he's editing the film. Yeah, I can see that.
And by the way, since I mentioned the producers, I want to note that this film has 6 stars, 6 total characters in the film, and 11 producers. That's one of the few times I've seen that kind of ratio.
So what other horror films, or maybe even just what other films can we think of that have something similar, where there's a character with a disability that maybe where it turns into an asset as opposed to such an obvious liability, and it ends up saving them in the end? Do we know of any other, can you give me any other films like this?
I can't actually. Not a horror film, but the movie Happy Feet is the film I use as the example of the social construction of disability. Because in Happy Feet, the character Mumble can't sing. Everyone in his tribe of penguins sings, and he can't, so he's disabled in that society. And then later in the film, he goes to a different tribe of penguins, and those penguins don't sing, and instead they dance. And Mumble is an excellent dancer. And so it's a fantastic way of showing how whether or not a condition is considered a disability or not depends on the social context in which a person finds himself.
We are probably the only podcast that have connected Happy Feet to A Quiet Place. I just want to throw that out there. It's quite novel.
I definitely want to say that Ash in Army of Darkness lost a hand, but was only able to wield a chainsaw because of that disability.
Groovy.
Well played. That's a good answer. Go ahead, Jim. I was going to say Hush, but it's not really it's more of a liability than an asset in Hush, but it's the other one where there's a deaf woman being stalked by a man who's just kind of playing cat and mouse in her house, and she's deaf, and it's pretty fucking scary.
And since you mentioned Hush, the Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode Hush, similar concept, right? Everyone loses the power to speak and they have to communicate in other ways.
That was one of the most terrifying episodes of any show I've ever seen. For those who don't know, most of you don't know, I hadn't seen Buffy the Vampire Slayer till this last year. I like turned in my nerd card. I just never saw it when it came out. And everyone told me when you get to this episode, there's a few episodes, but one of them was Hush. My wife says it's the scariest one. And I watched it. And I'm like, okay, you guys are leading up to this. Whenever people lead up to it and you hear that enough, it's not as scary. Dude, I could not sleep. I was so bothered. I felt so just you're right, Garrett. It has this the same theme of losing this, what is such an obviously important facet to how we communicate with one another, and just by virtue of losing that, the sort of things that can arise, the fears that happen, the things that you can't do. It was a really scary episode. But yeah, Hush came to mind. I don't know what else. Happy Feet. I don't know how we're gonna get past Happy Feet.
My answer to your question is well, I mean, I was thinking about Sherlock and Monk, how they are both portrayed. Well, Sherlock is portrayed in the newest iteration as relatively autistic, at least to some degree on the spectrum,
Sociopath,
and a sociopath, and Monk has obsessive compulsive disorder. Both of them are used in as kind of superpowers. Monk's ability to solve crimes because he sees how things are out of order. Sherlock's ability to not care about human, to only function as a logical being allows him to solve crimes. Those are two. Those are behavioral disorders that are often characterized as disabilities, and yet social construction of disability within the context of these shows, they're considered to be, sort of superpowers. I think that certainly answers your question and leads to interesting conversation as it relates to those two conditions, OCD and sociopathy / autism. Or spectrum.
Any other thoughts about the film you guys want to add?
Well, one thing I did want to talk about a little bit, and this is both a criticism, and both a negative of the film and a positive of the film. I thought that there were moments when the camera was too heavy-handed in setting up in giving the audience information that the characters didn't know. So the extreme close-up on the nail, I was like, well, shit, we know when this is gonna hit. And the same thing with, there was she's adjusting her cochlear implant when the alien is behind her, she doesn't see it, and then we see about this, about the sound being created. And I thought that was, so then when later on, when we're in the corn silo, we are smarter than the characters, so we know that she should turn that thing on to get the alien the fuck out of there. But that's like, I wonder if there were better ways to handle those two beats of the film, in which I thought it was giving me too much information, or it was either giving me the information too heavy-handed, or it was giving me too much information so that I was not, so that I didn't get the proper suspense and the proper, like the maximum amount of suspense and the maximum emotional reaction that I could have gotten out of that silo scene if I didn't know that she had a way out. I almost think that would have been the better reveal for the sonic weapon than earlier. But I was wondering how you guys responded to that, like if you guys agreed or disagreed.
Honestly, I kind of appreciated that we had that that pre-existing knowledge. There was a scene in the truck when the sound is happening. She can hear it. It's probably bothering the monster, but then she decides to turn it off. And the tension there that we received, because we knew that the answer was to turn it on and turn it up as opposed to turning it off. I think that made that a lot better. that I really think I know this isn't the movie they wanted to make, but I think if they had given you the knowledge of what the solution could be, but then showed you how they didn't quite get there and it became a tragedy and ended poorly, I think that would have been a much more powerful horror movie. I know it's not the movie they wanted to make because it probably would have shown that what they were trying to do in more of a negative light, obviously. It's not the movie they wanted to make, but I think it would have been a much better horror film if we had had that knowledge, and then it just didn't turn out well.
Thought you were an optimist. Now here you are trying to remove hope. Really?
I'm just throwing a wrench and offering counter arguments. Whatever.
Jim, I gotta say that particular point didn't bother me too much. It actually didn't bother me at all. It didn't really occur to me at all. Had the film been different, it might have been more effective now that I'm reflecting on it after the fact. But I don't imagine it would have been that much more effective. But something along the same lines, and again, I don't want to distract from your point, Jim, so this is to add to it, so we can maybe talk about both these things. One of the things which I did wonder is I kind of didn't want to see the creatures. I think it's a sort of standard Hitchcockian rule, right? What you don't see is scarier than what you do. And, early on in the film, you only get sort of these passing glimpses of it. And I thought that was a lot more effective at scaring me than when you actually get to see it all sort of teeth and ears and stuff like that. Now, obviously, if you did go back to try to sort of, almost not shoot at all, it would require a lot of different camera work and stuff like that. But I think the same basic structure could be taken place. Same basic plot points could all be hit. But you simply never would get a good look at the creature. And I think that would have worked better.
So I want to agree with you. I think that's absolutely true. I'm a huge fan of that. Just give you enough, to get you by sort of thing in horror. However, I think that the reason they did that is that at some point they're going to tie in the sort of Cloverfield lore into all of these films. And I don't know if you noticed this, but I'm one of like maybe the 8 people on the planet that liked the original Cloverfield film. There's not many people that like it, but one of the things you'll notice, and this is where I get all like into like how are these films connected? In the original Cloverfield film, the entities that drop off of the large Cloverfield beast look very similar to the monsters that are in this movie. And I know that there's supposed to be a connection between Cloverfield Lane, that Netflix Cloverfield movie, and then this film. I know that there's talks of trying to tie them all together in like an actual movie. But it's supposed to exist in the same universe. I can kind of explain how Garrett looks really flummoxed. Like what?
Yeah, no, this is the first I'm hearing of it.
I don't want to blow the Netflix special, but not special, the movie on Netflix, but that sort of explains how all of these things happen. So if you haven't seen it, I'm not going to blow it for you. But
I thought it was terrible.
It is terrible, right? But like the idea of like creating essentially multiple realities where these beings can get thrust into them is the idea. But those beings look very similar to the ones in the original Cloverfield. So I think it might, to go back to answering your, like, why would they show them, or was it better to show them or not? They may have done it just because at some point they may tie all these together and show you that the creatures are similar to that.
Is that just speculation on your part? Because
it's all, well, dude, I mean, it's like the internet. It's all over the internet.
Right.
Like, Reddit threads upon Reddit threads for this. But yes, it is
Cloverfield universe is all J.J. Abrams, and he was not a part of this film at all.
No, but it's all speculation at this point. But it would not surprise me at all if they do that.
I also liked the first Cloverfield film, although I thought the second one was better and the third one was terrible.
Yeah, the first one I thought was very underrated. A lot of people like walked out because they were like throwing up or something. I don't know. Jim, you've thrown up in movies. Did you throw up in Cloverfield? Did you barf?
No, I only throw up when people put non-food items in their mouths.
That's right. I was about to put some scissors in my mouth just to see what happens.
And then I'd shut you off. But actually, I was reading on IMDb, they have a quote from one of the producers about the Cloverfield connection. And he says, in filmmakers, we crave new and original ideas, and we feel like so much as what's out there is IP. It's comic books, it's remakes, it's sequels. We show up to all of them. We enjoy those movies too, but our dream, this is the relevant part, was always to drop something different into the marketplace. So we feel grateful that Paramount embraced the movie as its own thing. So the internet can speculate, and in fact, it's entirely possible that this is not, when has a producer ever lied to the media? God knows that's never happened. But according to this particular quote, this is not tied to the Cloverfield bit. But there was previous in the IMDb thing, it did say that there was original speculation that when the script was being shot, that they should tie it into Cloverfield.
So I wonder if they're gauging the success of this film and thinking, well, let's show the monsters and make them somewhat because they do look really similar to the ones in Cloverfield. So I wonder if there's like testing the waters to be like, hey, maybe we can do another movie and maybe make it even more Cloverfieldian or whatever.
Well, year to date, this is number 3, and until Infinity War popped, this was number 2. So it was Black Panther, this, and it had just outgrossed, I believe it was Rampage, but I could be mistaken about that. Or no, not Rampage, but it had just outgrossed another film. I'm sorry, I'm stalling so that I can check my charts, my box office charts.
But it's while I was looking that up, Jim. One thing to keep in mind. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that unlike Ready Player One or Black Panther or Avengers, this was a $17 million film budget, and it's made over $217 million worldwide. So in terms of ROI, this is easily the most profitable film of the year. It still hasn't passed Get Out, but that was last year. I think that was a $5 million film, I think, that made like $250 million, something like that. So that's still one of the best ROIs since a Blair Witch Project. But anytime you can invest $17 million and make $217 million, that is a picture book of success, even if it's not making as much as Avengers.
Yeah, worldwide, it's according to last week's box office, it was in the 130s, second place behind Black Panther, and then of course Avengers: Infinity War blew the whole thing out of the water. So that's number 2 below Black Panther.
130 is just the domestic gross, though. Worldwide.
Yeah.
I think apparently they have green lighted a sequel, I guess, or at least another film. I'm not sure if it's going to maybe be a prequel rather than a sequel or something like that. But I think
my porn prequel.
Your porn. But no, I think Krasinski. I mean, I can't say I was necessarily a terribly big fan of his before this. I've seen him in several things, of course, The Office, and Leatherheads, and a couple other films. And I never disliked him, but I never particularly liked him. But I got to say, I'm very curious to see where he's going to go from here now that he's hopefully got a blank check and a lot more weight behind him, because I was really impressed with this.
It's very similar to Get Out with Jordan Peele, right? Like there's something about like comedy writers doing horror and hitting a nerve. How odd is that? That's so weird. Yeah, I mean, and like really like well done horror films that are doing really good in the box office and everyone's going to see them. I mean, it's just kind of cool to be at a time where like we're having horror films do that, and they're actually good horror films. I don't know. I feel like it's a good time for horror.
Well, it's a good time for horror. I especially with some of the new producers and new talents coming on the marketplace. Jason Blum is doing a lot for horror. Except for
that last film he just did.
Well,
Truth or
Dare. Hey, if you throw a bunch of up the flagpole, sometimes nobody's going to salute one of them. But yeah, I wonder if there's a connection between being good at comedy and being good at horror. Is there something similar about those two art forms that make the cross-pollination fairly easy for people? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Both fear and humor are human universals. They cut across and exist in all cultures.
Yeah, certainly. But I wonder if there's one of the things that sort of that I'm kind of making a connection with is like both rely upon surprise. Like both rely upon pulling the rug out from under you. The punchline is supposed to be the moment when you're like, I wasn't expecting that. And then the horror film, it's like, oh, fuck, I wasn't expecting that. And so I wonder if those two art forms have a really interesting Venn diagram. Would Robin Williams have been a really good horror film?
He played in a couple of horror films.
Yeah, that's right.
1 Hour Photo and
1 Hour Photo, right? And then Insomnia.
some. Yeah, both were not the best.
I thought 1 Hour Photo was pretty solid. I mean, definitely more atmospheric, but I liked it a lot.
Yeah, I think to connect comedy and horror, there's something about like riding the rift in both genres. There's something like it's the notes you don't hear in comedy. It's like these intuitions, I think, are the same things. There's something about they resonate with some deep part of who we are. Like, oh yeah, I noticed that too. And then oh yeah, like that is shit. That is a kind of scary thing to think about. Or just it's something that penetrates the skin. You know what I mean? It goes under. It reaches something deeper. And I mean, I guess and to some extent you can say that about a lot of different genres. But I feel like those two do something similar. They hit the same funny bone. I don't know. But yeah, we need to do one on Get Out, guys. I mean, this seems to be a trend. In 2019, we're gonna have another comedy writer. We're gonna have like Jay Leno does the best horror film of 2019 or something. Yeah, can you imagine? Like if that happens, there's this just postmodernism writ large. Like there's no reason to
Kevin
go to movies.
Smith has done a couple of horror films. He's another guy with teeth in comedy.
Yeah, and I will do what you just I'm gonna do what Jim just did. His horror films have been terrible. The fucking Walrus one was one of the stupidest things I've ever seen in my life. But yeah, Justin Long was in.
Had its moments, but yeah, as a whole, it was lesser Smith, but it had its moments that I liked.
Yeah.
But yeah, Get Out, and then who knows, John Mulaney's next horror film next year. I think one of the things that's and this is for, I don't know exactly what the tone of this film is, whether it's going to be horror film or not, but it's certainly far more serious. Bo Burnham did a film called Eighth Grade that is tearing up Sundance, so that might actually be one that we'll watch out for when it comes out in wide release.
That's good to know.
Am I the only one who thinks that we should cast John Krasinski in the film adaptation of The Last of Us?
Oh, that would be cool. That would be cool.
He very much looked the part in this.
Do you actually know? It'd be a perfect film to do. Do you know if they're going to do a film adaptation of The Last of Us?
I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me. I kind of hope they don't. I think it stands alone really so well as a video game that, and it hits emotionally like a film. It's the kind of thing that elevates the genre of video games to a higher art form, I feel, and translating into a film, I think, would sort of cheapen that.
For every video game that you can say that of, they've made a film of it and just have butchered it. Final Fantasy, Resident, all of them. All right, let's wrap it up. Let's give our final thoughts. Unless you guys have anything else you guys want to add. Any other stuff? Okay. Yeah, so I guess so I'll give my final thoughts on the film first. Overall, it's might be one of the better films of the year, definitely. It didn't have a lot of a super replay value for me. It didn't scare me too much in terms of the monster, in terms of the stuff that I think it was trying to sell me in terms of like the trailers and the horror and the monsters. What did it for me, and I think this was to some extent in the trailers and in the film was keeping your family together, and that just bugged me. And you know what? If I was going through something different, I probably would have read that into the film too. So who the hell knows? But overall, good film. Amazing acting as well as directing on the part of John Krasinski. I loved some of the stuff that was novel in the film, like having a deaf actress and removing all of the sound and hearing my stomach growl in the middle of the movie and popcorn being chomped on. That made me all the more tense. That was really weird. I have not had an experience like that in going to the theater, maybe ever. It was very strange. So there was a lot of tension, good buildup. The film has sins, like every other film. Didn't hit the real root of, I think, what scares me. It hit something I think that's current stuff I'm thinking about and made me think about it in a different way. Made me ponder things I don't like necessarily thinking about. So I'll give it if we're going to do the 4 stars, I'd give it a solid 3. I give it a solid 3 out of 5 stars. Nothing, good film, but not the sort of thing that is going to make me not be able to fall asleep at night. The tension went away. One of the things for me, what makes a part of what I mean when I say a scary movie is I'm still bugged about something about it later, thinking about it later. And this film didn't have too much of that. I just thought about the kid stuff during the film. I left. Didn't really sit with me or change it. it just didn't have the deep resonance that lasts long after the movie's over, in the way that some of the other films that we've talked about, maybe Sunshine, It Follows, Let the Right One In, those have bugged me since I've seen them. Event Horizon, that's probably the king of all of them. But that's not to say that didn't make this a good horror film. So good horror film, not the best horror film, one of the better ones of this year, and I would recommend it. That's a 3 stars.
Guess I'll jump in next. Yeah, I overall liked the film. I thought it was very well made. Technical points, I think, were all very solid. I share some of Ben's reservations about it sort of being the basic plot being a little twice told, a story I've seen before. I kind of would have liked them if them to have raised the stakes at some point a little bit more. I also didn't feel, I wasn't scared by the film, but I thought the tension was great. And it was a film I think that was almost had better tension rather than fear. It was obviously a close relationship there, but yeah, there's nothing that's going to keep you up at night about this when you could watch it and then fall right to sleep, I think. But that's, I don't really consider that a criticism. I don't think the film was necessarily trying to scare in that way. I think it was just trying to keep you on the edge of your seat. Yeah, I heard every single chair in the audience. I heard every single person eating their popcorn. That was an experience I've never had in a theater, or at least never with quite so much of an awareness across the duration of the entire film. So that was truly solid and impressive. Some other minor critiques, like I say, but they're all sort of nitpicky stuff. Nothing that really detracts from the film overall. So yeah, I'd give this a 4 stars out of 5. I think it's a very solid film.
My score is lower than yours. That is the first time that has ever happened on this. I know for a fact. That is really interesting.
Well, your score is half a point lower than mine, too. I am 3.5 on this. That was, yeah. So I think this film, I said it at the outset of, sorry for the second time. It's a great genre film, technically very well done. Sound design, as I said, I'm calling it sound design Oscar, sound and sound mixing Oscar. Certainly sound mixing Oscar nomination, at least probably win. And I am I thought that the technical side of this was incredibly well done. I think some of the points that Ben brought up about its plot being relatively pedestrian that's what I mean when I say it's a solid genre film. It's a perfectly well-made genre film. It's not reaching for that much higher, although I do like some of the antinatalist messages that we've sort of teased out in this podcast. I wonder how much John Krasinski was thinking about those types of things as he was crafting this film. But yeah, so but those themes didn't really resonate with me to the point where I was like, oh, this is clearly about that. And wow, look at the interesting thing it has to say about that. Instead, it's just sort of, it's sort of touching on those issues rather than giving them full exploration. So for that reason, it's a well-made genre film. And that's nothing against genre films again. But the other thing that I wanted to bring up was how this film paces out information. It is if it will be studied in film schools, it will be studied as how to craft suspense, or like how suspense works in film. And there were times in this movie where it really got that. It really did everything perfectly. And then there were other times when it's like, you're telegraphing a little bit too much too quickly there, you. So those were my minor criticisms, which brought it down, which brought it to a 3.5 for me. Ben, what did you think? I suspect you might be lower than even Noah.
I don't know if I'm going to be lower than Noah or not. My honest feeling about this is that it's yeah, I mean, I think 3 probably makes sense for this. It's a familiar story that was done really well, right? I mean, it was really interesting to see Jim Krasinski. Jim, I don't know if it's his first time directing or not, but if it is, it seems like he did a really good job.
John Krasinski, third film.
Third film. Okay. Well, for his third, then it absolutely sucks, and I have no remorse. No, like, I mean, there's a lot that they did really well, right? I mean, it really just didn't get to me very much. I mean, it was interesting in a lot of ways that you've already explained. But you know, as far as any kind of like real lasting power, like Noah was saying, you know, I don't think it's going to be something that I think about in 5 years. Like, man, I really want to go back and watch that film. You know, I want to see what was there. I want to dig into this more. I don't think there's much more to really dig into, right? So for the fact that it was quality and it was entertaining and they did some really interesting, some novel things, you know, it has some social relevance and some power there, but I don't think the substance is as weighty as I would like it to be. So yeah, I think 3 makes sense for this. Middle of the line.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Deadly Analysis podcast. You know, our next episode will likely be on Hereditary. I don't want to nail that down now, but it will likely be the next one we do. That's coming out, I think, in the next few weeks. But if you like what you saw tonight, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're still alive. It's not a quiet place over there for the most part, at least on Instagram and Twitter. So hit us up if you like what you saw. Leave a comment. What are your thoughts? Are kids bad? Should we not have them when there's aliens trying to attack us? The hell's going on with those picture frames? Give us your 2 cents. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Thanks for watching, and tune in the next show. Appreciate it.